Hello and welcome to Securing Your Network in Every Direction with Zero Trust. Today's webinar is sponsored by Illumio and Netskope and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech and I'm excited to be your moderator for this action-packed webinar. Now, before we get into today's great event, we have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. While there won't be time for a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this presentation, we do have experts from Netskope and Illumio waiting in chat to jump in and answer any questions that you have. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to 3 PDFs in there about the partnership and related technologies. So one is about using Illumio and Netskope together to extend Zero Trust to remote access architecture. Another is about the Illumio Zero Trust Segmentation platform. And the third covers securing your network with Zero Trust. So I encourage you to access those resources now and feel free to share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. Now, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's timely and interesting session. So ransomware attacks are on the rise. Breaches are now costing organizations on average $4.45 million, according to some estimates. So IT leaders are turning towards Zero Trust solutions to strengthen resilience. And to that end, Netskope and Illumio are partnering to help you protect against breaches and build cyber resilience. And we're going to hear about that partnership today. We're going to learn more about the origin of Zero Trust and understand the fundamentals of how to implement the strategy in different IT environments. We can look forward to demystifying some of the common misconceptions around Zero Trust. We'll get an understanding of why both Zero Trust Segmentation and Zero Trust Network Access are essential to a successful Zero Trust strategy. And we're going to discover the benefits that the Netskope and Illumio integration can offer your organization, including increased visibility and greater security across a hybrid multi-cloud environment. So to kick off the webinar, you're going to hear from Illumio's Chief Evangelist, John Kindervag, and Netskope's Field CTO, Steve Riley, as they discuss the evolution of network security as organizations have transformed their environments in the hybrid multi-cloud era. So John and Steve are both former analysts at Forrester and Gartner, respectively, and together they've probably done more to develop and popularize the concept of Zero Trust than anyone else in the industry. So you're going to be hearing directly from the source here. Today, they're going to explain why Zero Trust is essential to protecting modern networks and how Zero Trust Segmentation and Zero Trust Network Access are essential and complementary components of your strategy. Now, after John and Steve's discussion, we'll move into a conversation between Heather Giral, lead technologist at Illumio, and Gary Jenkins, principal solutions architect at Netskope, about how the Illumio and Netskope integration enables network and security teams to create Zero Trust policies that consistently secure access in an organization's perimeter and within its hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure. So we've got a packed hour ahead of us. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to John Kindervag to get us started.
Hi, everyone. John Kindervag here. I am the Chief Evangelist of Illumio. I am also the creator of Zero Trust. I did that when I was at Forrester Research. And I'm joined by my friend, former Gartner analyst, now a leader over at Netskope, Steve Riley.
Thanks, John. Hey, everybody. I am Steve Riley, Field CTO at Netskope. And as John mentioned, I was previously at Gartner, where I wrote the Magic Quadrant for Cloud Access Security Brokers, the Market Guide for Zero Trust Network Access, and the Technology Profile for SaaS Security Posture Management.
So give everybody who's watching just a little bit of a taste of what we're doing together here between Netskope and Illumio.
I think this is really cool because the combination of Netskope and Illumio gives our customers the ability to address all 4 points of the compass. We like to talk about this east, west, north, south sort of thing. Our focus is that north-south traffic between the customer's environment and whatever clouds they might subscribe to. We look at a lot of context in those interactions and can help people make dynamic decisions based on those contexts and those signals. While your forte is the east-west traffic within a data center, placing the labels on there. And what's really cool now about the joint partnership is that we can read your labels, and then our customers can make access control decisions to your protected workloads based on what those labels have to say.
Yeah, so this is a little bit like chocolate and peanut butter, I think. Everybody talks about better together, but this really is better together because when you're building a zero trust environment, you have to think about the traffic holistically. Now with these two platforms, you kind of end up, can build a zero trust environment very quickly, very inexpensively, and have very low overhead from a management perspective because we're a platform controlling segmentation across all places where you put these protected workloads we call protect surfaces. You're a platform about all the stuff outside of that. And so, I mean, this really is going to, I think, change the way people look at architecting zero trust environments.
When I saw this market emerge for new forms of access to private applications that was an alternative to VPN, that was about the time when I and some other analysts at Gartner were starting to pay closer attention to this notion of zero trust principles, and especially the requirement for the ability to gather signals and context to make those dynamic access control decisions. And I saw, I want to say, a couple dozen, maybe even more, small startups all building this new kind of remote access based on the principles that you had highlighted in some of your early research. And that's why I decided to call it Zero Trust Network Access. If I could do it all over again, though, I'd probably call it ZTNA for Zero Trust Application Access, because it really is about, at least this portion of our platform, right, is about connecting people to resources, not necessarily devices to networks. Now, in your case, because you're within the data center, you're still very much node focused. That's right, that your product relies on indicators like IP addresses to apply those labels?
IP addresses is one thing that we can look at. We can look at anything that the platform or the thing that we're sitting on, right, gives us, whatever that signal is. I think that this is one thing that you've highlighted here, which is the multiplicity of signals that you need to make an access control decision. And this is one of my frustrations in Zero Trust about how everybody's focused on identity. And then they think they can take one signal and then make a decision and that will work. And that's the easy button. And of course, I always point out that Snowden and Manning proved that that wasn't true. So you need these signals, and you need these signals across all the places where the traffic moves. And so the traffic moves to an application in ZTNA, right? But it moves across a network to get to that application. That application is sitting on some sort of device, some sort of server, something, some sort of hard drive or a flash memory, whatever it is. And so everything is all integrated now. And we, it's how we think of these things as a systematic whole that I think is going to really determine how people are successful in this area.
Yeah, I have experienced the same frustration you do, John. When people, how do I get a zero trust? It's like, well, you don't get it. It's a strategy. It's a way of thinking. It's like, okay, well, what do I need to do? Well, you need the ability to gather all these signals and contexts and analyze them. It's like, well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from CASB and SWIG and other sources, not just identity, like you had said. There's signals that come from endpoint protection platforms, There are signals that can come from EDR, which I guess is part of an EPP. One thing I like to do, and I want to bring the labels back into the conversation, but like data labels. So when I'm explaining the signals to people, I'd like to use this example. If let's say we want to have an access control that's dependent on the person's device and the kind of content. So if they're on a managed device, then they have access to all content classifications. Doesn't matter because the device is managed. If the person's on an unmanaged device, now we're going to look at the label. If the label says public, then full access. If the label says private, then even though the application might not allow it, we can reduce the access to read only, because we don't want someone on an unmanaged device uploading something to something that's labeled private. If the label is confidential, then we could say the access is none at all for unmanaged devices, which means the policy says to interact with confidential information, you must be on a managed device. So it's this ability to combine these signals into sets of policies that really create what I would characterize as a true expression of those zero trust principles.
Absolutely. And let's pick up on that policy statement that you just kind of made with a bunch of different signals and how you would do that, because this has been my focus, right? Is how do we do policy? I mean, zero trust really came out of a frustration about policy, about how firewalls had a trust model, and that if you went from a high trust level to a low trust level, you didn't need a policy. And I thought that was insane, right? Because it was, the policy was the interface was labeled 100, and the external interface was labeled 0. And I said every interface should have the same trust level 0. That's where zero trust actually comes from. So when we think about policy, all we can do is allow traffic or deny traffic, right? And it's how do we get this telemetry, these signals from as many things that we can get, so we can validate that traffic and then have some high degree of confidence that it's okay to allow that to happen. And I think we just allow a lot of bad traffic because we don't actually know what we need to protect, right? I mean, you said something which I think was aspirational, that people would know, the data classification of their data that they're sending across, or the workload that they're using, or the application. And I have just found that they don't know that, right? I mean, they often don't even know what they're protecting. So talk about how you guys get visibility in that, and I'll talk about how we get visibility and how you get so much more visibility combining our solutions.
We see everything. We are a giant proxy in the sky. We terminate TLS. That's how we can inspect what's inside the traffic and apply the policies that our customers write. And then we reestablish TLS from our cloud back to the destination. So the only time our customers' traffic is in clear text is in the memory of whichever data center happens to be processing that. We don't store anything on disk. And because we can see not only the traffic, but the context that surrounds the traffic. Who is the person? What has that person's historical behavior been? How much risk have they might exhibited in the past? We could see this sort of similar signals about devices, device health, identity, risk, behavior. We can look at things like time of day, day of week. We can look at those labels. We can detect the difference between a personal, let's call it instance, and a corporate instance of the same service. So by knowing the difference between these two, we can apply those policies to ensure that sensitive data goes and stays where it should, doesn't go and doesn't stay where it shouldn't.
Yeah, because we're kind of a similar thing going on inside of the environment where the data or the application or the asset is stored. So we have a lot more visibility post edge, right? So you once you hand us the traffic, then it goes to someplace even more granular. But as the traffic's coming to us, we can make more granular rule decisions on what's going into a microsegment. And so this is the power of this combination. And I've always sort of envisioned it for, well, I wrote the first paper on zero trust architecture in 2010, and I envisioned essentially what we're delivering today. It took, almost 14 years to get there, but I think we're at the point now where we're going to see people being able to really take the zero trust strategy and build it much more easily than we ever could before.
I think it might be interesting to mention to the crowd here a couple areas where our integration actually kind of shows its value, and I can think of two. So one is because we are consuming the labels from the workloads on which Illumio has been installed. We can, for example, react if one of your labels shows that a workload has suddenly become risky for whatever reason. We might not immediately know the reason, but we do know that your label has changed to indicate that the workload is risky. We should reduce or eliminate the ability for people to interact with that workload. But there's another one that I think is also quite interesting, and it might not be intuitively obvious, is when a workload switches, let's say, from QA to production. Most companies don't want developers to be messing around with production workloads. And nobody intends to go do things on purpose, right? But it's tempting to sometimes just tweak a production workload a little bit because that's a lot faster than going through all the testing harnesses again. But that's where opportunities arise for mistakes. And I think, John, you probably agree that a lot of security events, maybe the majority of them, arise because somebody made a mistake somewhere rather than an actual software vulnerability or a bug, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also some things going on here related to the ease of management and configuration. The long-term care and feeding of any technology, that's going to be the greatest cost that you have. The actual acquisition cost that everybody focuses on is a drop in the bucket compared to what it's going to cost you to maintain it, to write the policy. And so now managing these systems is so much more intuitive using these labeling types of paradigms than it ever has been before. You don't have to understand the syntax of all the different things that you're interacting with. You just have to write a label, and technology like ours, like yours, will automatically instantiate a policy that is computer code, but you don't have to know how to code it. So you don't have to be, the version of a network developer, which was what I was before I became an analyst, right?
One of the first research notes I wrote when I joined Gartner was about this shared responsibility model that seems to be a common thing people talk about in clouds. And I wanted to make a very clear distinction where that handoff is from the provider to the customers. I think Forrester might have also had some research about this too. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, when we were at Forrester, we called it an uneven handshake because we saw the same thing you did. It wasn't a sharing of things as much as the hard delineations of where our responsibility is and your responsibility starts. And so you're exactly right. You don't need physical security. The cloud provider is going to do all the patching, right? The software upgrades, all that stuff. That is great. But we talked about it as the preposition problem. Everything that goes into the cloud is your responsibility. And yes, you can do it with the native controls, except you won't do it with the native controls because the complexity of doing it that way manually is too hard, right? So you'll just say, okay, that's good enough. And there's also a perception that the cloud provider automatically makes it more secure, which they don't. And they don't actually say that. But, and they tell you they do have these tools, and they do, but the level of effort of manually configuring them is really, really high. And yeah, you can do it if you have a lot of people, right, to manage that. But it's more effective to use a platform to do it. And that's what we're trying to communicate here today. So I've always said that people should do the things that people are good at, and computers should do the things that computers are good at. Managing complex sets of workloads is custom made for computational systems. And so that's what we're doing. We're managing these tools that are already there for the most part, adding things to them, of course, but we're doing things at scale that you would be doing one at a time. And it's that scalability that provides so much enhancement to security. And that's, I think, sometimes a message being lost, because people say, well, I could do this with the native controls. Absolutely, you could. But again, it's you won't. And one of the things we talk about, and we've talked about this before, is leaky buckets, right?
Oh, yes.
Leaky buckets, like Jack and Jill going up a hill. What I found, and I've done a lot of weird things like read the court filings about some of these cases that have happened, and the lawsuits and the details. And a lot of times it's somebody who says, oh, all of this security is really slowing things down, so let's just open up this bucket to everybody who has a domain credential, because of course identity is going to solve everything. And then some person who has a credential does something which we would consider bad with that credential, i.e. Snowden and Manning, right? Trusted users on trusted devices with good identity systems, but nobody looked at their packets post-authentication. Nobody looked and said, what are you doing with the data? And so you've already, you've talked about that people are kind of moving this data around for their own purposes that we would say is not within policy. And so it's not that there's a problem with the bucket and the bucket has a hole in it. It's that we're punching holes in it, and we don't understand what that's going to do to our organization when we continue to punch holes in the bucket, and we're the ones making it leaky.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a better characterization of the leaky bucket, because it's not an accident. It's a deliberate weakening that maybe was good for expediency for a little while, but then people forget about it, and then someone else comes along and finds it later, and then now your data is open to the world. But at least, the default on those IaaS buckets is the creator is the only one who has access, and everybody else has nothing. So it's a good starting point anyway. But so let's compare that to SaaS, though, because I think the SaaS one is a lot scarier. SaaS vendors want their products to be wide open by default. They want people to share. And they require you to come in and lock things down. So, for example, every brand new SharePoint tenant is open to the world. You got to lock that thing down to your own company. I'm kind of curious what your take would that be on the different as a service models.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those things, when I look at them architecturally and I ask a vendor, what ports do I need to open to make this work? Oh, all of them. We don't know. Just open everything. Right? Because no one has really thought about that. And I think that's just true in the way a lot of technology is made. This is true for morphine infusion pumps, right? Just open everything. It's true for a lot of different technologies that control systems. We don't really know how it works so much anymore, but just open up everything. And so the general view is security is an inhibitor of the business, but it's really the enabler of the business, because if the computational systems go down, your business doesn't run. We're still stuck in a 20th century model where IT is a cost center, and it's just something that we have to do and put up with, and we have to put up with those silly security people. But let's take the airline business, for example, right? There's 3 Ps. I call them the 3 Ps in the airline business. Passengers, planes, and pilots. That's generally all you needed. But guess what? Now you need a computer system. And I don't know of a good P word for computer system. If you get one. Processor, maybe. Yeah. But if that thing goes down, that plane can't take off. It just is impossible. It can be sitting there at the gate, but there's no way for the dispatcher to dispatch it out of the gate, to get it on the tarmac, to get it on the right taxiway, to assign it to a runway, to have it take off and hand it off to the right air traffic control. It just doesn't work. We're so dependent upon this kinds of technology that businesses don't run with it. We are no longer just a cost center. We are integral to your business. And when you start to understand that, you will change your perspective on how important this stuff is and why you need to spend more money on it and take it more seriously and put more effort into cybersecurity, because again, your business is dependent upon it.
Let's bring the conversation back to zero trust. Do you think that zero trust principles and the ability to evaluate context and make real-time access control decisions opens up to more than just allow or block? I like to think of this idea of shades of access, where between allow and block, we have options like redact, reduce behavior, change activities, coach users toward better activities. When I'm talking with our customers and bring this notion up, that the ability to have something between the two helps us get away from what you had just discussed, from the cost center or the Department of No, to enabling good security, the Department of Yes you can with conditions, to strike that right balance between staying secure and getting work done. I'm just kind of curious what you might think about some of these ideas.
Yeah, I think the things that you talk about are the signals that we use to make the allow or deny decision. In zero trust, we start with a default deny. Yeah. Nothing is allowed, and then we say, John has access to this, Steve has access to that. And that's how it actually works at a binary level in the network in TCP/IP. We need a lot of other conditional signals. We need to understand how sensitive is the resource we're connecting to, right? Is it, is this a bunch of PDFs that nobody cares about, or is this the crown jewels of our business? There's a lot of things that I've already mentioned morphine infusion pumps. I worked a lot in securing hospitals. They were the bane of my existence because there was no security there. And you could actually, and I proved this, you could hack into a morphine infusion pump, change the dosage. Now, if that's happening to a patient, that's a great movie plot, isn't it?
We talk about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. I actually think the most challenging one is the integrity, making sure that the data hasn't been maliciously modified in some way. And you just gave a perfect example of an integrity violation. And I think those are some of the most difficult kinds of breaches to detect and remediate, because often the damage has already been done, if you even know it's there at all.
Right, absolutely. But you go back to the CIA triangle. I would also argue it's not an equilateral triangle anymore. It's an isosceles triangle, because what we care about is availability, right?
Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I joke that the C now stands for compromise, because we have a lot of highly available yet compromised networks out there. And that's why we have dwell time. I mean, that people, the attackers are in these systems for days, months, weeks, sometimes even years, and no one notices. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened. I mean, I've had so many times where I've worked on the design of a zero trust environment because the government told the CEO of a major corporation, how come this important intellectual property was found in this computer that we, confiscated from an adversarial nation state? What are you talking about? The network was working, right? And so the network working does not mean it's secure. And that's something that people don't understand either. Well, Steve, as always, it's fun to chat with you. We could do it for a lot longer, and I'm sure we'll do more of these.
I was thinking the same thing, so I hope we get to do more too. Yeah.
Yeah. So for everybody out there, take a look at this partnership, this chocolate and peanut butter, Netskope and Illumio. Give it a look, and Steve and I will be back. Steve, thanks for joining.
Always a pleasure. Happy to come.
All right. Well, personally, what a privilege has been for me to listen in on that great conversation between two of the leading lights in establishing zero trust as an industry concept. This has been excellent so far. And hopefully, after hearing John and Steve there, the title of this event is becoming clear to everybody when we're talking about securing your network in every direction. That's every cardinal direction, with Netskope handling north-south and Illumio handling the east-west traffic. So speaking of which, we've got a poll question for all of you. We'd really like to hear from you about which of those directions is the priority for your organization. So the question is, NIST provides 3 key enforcement points for enabling a zero trust architecture. Which would you prioritize highest in your current environment? And the options there are identity, network access, which is the north-south traffic, or workload segmentation, which is the east-west traffic. So we'll leave that up there for everyone to have a chance to fill in their answer. And just a reminder, while this poll is live, is that we've got people standing by to take any questions that you have. We've got more, another great conversation coming up here. So type those questions into the console. No question is too basic or too complicated. If the Illumio and Netskope experts in the chat here can't cover your question, they can pass it along to someone on their teams who can and get back to you either during the hour or after the event. So also remember those handouts. Now that you've heard a bit from Illumio and Netskope, you've probably got a better sense of what resource you would want to dig into. So I just wanted to remind you all that those resources are there. All right, let's see where we are on the poll. Great, we've got a lot of responses so far, and it looks like identity is sort of our top choice for people, and the other two are neck and neck. The workload segmentation and the network access. So keep filling in your answers. Maybe yours will be the one that determines what the overall take is. Okay. Well, let's give it a quick countdown from 5 for any more responses. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your participation there. And so for the first part of the webinar, we had that strategic discussion. Now let's get to tactical and technical. So we're going to bring on Heather Giral, lead technologist at Illumio, and Gary Jenkins, principal solutions architect at Netskope, for this part of the conversation, which I believe will also include a demo. Okay, kicking over to Heather and Gary now.
Gary Jenkins, Worldwide Solutions Architect with Netskope. I work on partner integrations. We produce about 6 plugins, integrations a month, and with most of the major vendors like Illumio. I brought Heather with me today to talk about our Illumio integration.
Thank you, Gary. I am Heather Giral. I am the lead technologist with Illumio, and I work on integrations, and we have recently built a great integration with Netskope, and we'd like to go over it. So let me tell you about Illumio. So Illumio is market leader in microsegmentation. And when I say microsegmentation, it is, I would say, most important and often most ignored part of the Zero Trust Network architecture. And as defined by NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, there are 3 pillars to Zero Trust Network architecture. Number 1 is your identity. Then you have your service edge, and then you have your microsegmentation. So ever since the advent of Zero Trust 10 years ago, a lot of security has been focused around the Zero Trust of a user, like how to limit user accessing, how to verify the identity of the user. But once, let's say you have that Zero Trust identified around the user, where that user can go from there. So I'll give an example. Let's say you have a user, you verified his identity using some identity provider, then you are able to define where that user can access. So once that user has accessed that particular resource, what can that user do from there? So that's where microsegmentation comes in. So like I said, the 3 pillars of microsegmentation as defined by NIST are identity, your secure service edge. Historically, this has been done by VPN, but now with Netskope, it's like your ZTNA boundary. And the third part is microsegmentation. And if you are trying to build a complete zero trust network architecture, you have to have all these three pillars joined together to have a complete zero trust network architecture.
Exactly. And that's what Netskope brings to this. So Illumio can do all that microsegmentation without us, right? So what we bring to the table on this is we give you that zero trust access to get to those workloads that are in your data center. So it's basically a VPN replacement. And so what Netskope does is you have a client that runs on a computer, it connects you to the Netskope cloud where we then inspect your traffic, and then we stitch that traffic to the data center. And then with the integration that we have, then we're able to really secure that traffic. And as the status of the Illumio workload changes, it automatically updates Netskope in order to allow or deny you access to that workload.
And that makes it very dynamic. Now, you don't have to define your zero trust policy for every new user you onboard. You don't have to define your zero trust policy for any new workload you onboard. Once you have this integration in place, it's all a matter of putting the right labels on the right workloads. And as soon as you put those labels, those workloads can receive policies from Illumio, and they can have those policies applied on their local native firewall and define the access where these workloads can communicate or where these workloads can't communicate.
On the Netskope side, what we do is we have a custom application that we've built. And so the custom application as part of our ZTNA framework is we say which applications, which workloads you're able to get to. With the Illumio integration, what we've done is we've hooked it into that particular workflow, and they provide us which workloads you should or should not be allowed to get to. This integration was somewhat easy to do. Working with Illumio was very easy, where they were able to simply call our APIs and add that information to our workloads.
And I would like to emphasize how simple and yet so powerful this integration is. Illumio passes that workloads metadata to Netskope, and Netskope is able to now consume that labels and define the policies. And you don't have to do it manually. It's all automated. It's all dynamic. You do not need to make any changes for any new user you onboard. You don't have to manually type any IP addresses or network addresses to define the access. Netskope is able to pull that information from Illumio and is able to update the policies dynamically.
Yeah, that's a good point. So as things change in the environment, maybe you're going to replace a server or a workload, this is all dynamic. And so you don't have to go back in and make changes. The same policy on Netskope applies just based off of that label that they're going to hand us.
And especially in this fast environment where you have new applications going to production or moving within different environments from your on-prem to your cloud or from your QA environment to prod, it's all so fast and it's hard to keep track for any person managing that environment. And with Illumio and Netskope, this integration makes it really simple to manage all that because you don't need manual intervention anymore. You have those labels getting updated dynamically, and Netskope can consume that information and can change and update the policies.
I should also say that within Netskope, we have the ability to read which group you're in. So if you're an AD and you're in a particular group, we're able to bring that into this policy also. So we can say a person with a certain access of maybe QA, quality assurance, if they're in that group in AD, we can then allow or deny them access to different workloads based off of their Active Directory membership.
And not only that, once they are able to access that workload, let's say you have a QA user, you allow that user to access the QA environment. Now, that part from Netskope side, you are able to define that access, but where that user can go from, once they reach that workload, where can they go from there? That should also be monitored or limited. That's where Illumio comes in. The microsegmentation policies are able to define, okay, QA user, once they're able to reach a workload within a QA environment, they should be able to stay within that environment. They should not be able to hop onto the production environment. So I think that's really the beauty of this integration, that you build the complete zero trust network architecture from your identity. You define a user that's part of your QA group. Then you have your network access, that this QA user can reach the particular QA environment. And then you have your microsegmentation, that once that user is in that environment, that user cannot hop onto production environment. So that completes your zero trust network architecture very simply and dynamically.
This integration secures all degrees of the compass. Netskope will provide the north-south security, and Illumio can provide the east-west security.
So one of the use cases that I see maybe very common for this is, let's say you have a workload or server or some application that's breached or that's infected with ransomware, and you want to quarantine it, you want to limit it, you want your users not be able to access it, you want that workload not be able to communicate with other workloads. So once we identify a workload that has been infected, it is as simple as that. We just put that this workload is in quarantine, and we can pass that information to Netskope. And then Netskope can block all other access for any user to access that workload, and only allow, let's say, a system admin to get into that workload to do the investigation or see what happens. And that's also the beauty of microsegmentation solution. Your attack surface gets very, very limited. I mean, in this era of a lot of ransomware and a lot of threats happening, I think the only safer way to protect your environment is to limit your attack surface, and that's exactly what microsegmentation does. It limits the exposure, it limits the communication, it limits the unwanted communication between different workloads. I think, so this, simply put, like one of the use cases that I can think of is like if you have an infected workload, just put a quarantine label on it, and we can pass that information to Netskope.
So once it's quarantined, then Netskope can change policy, right? So the label gets passed over to Cloud Exchange, which then updates the custom application within Netskope. And so now that it has that, Netskope would have a policy that would say, you know what, I see this workload is now in quarantine state. There's a policy around that. And then we'll use that tie back into Active Directory to read what group you're in, and only allow certain individuals access to that, because you don't want to block everybody, because then it can't be fixed. So what you want is the ability for the fixer, or the person, the system admin, that can go in and fix that workload to still have access to it. So that's right.
Yeah,
that's how it works. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. And similar thing, like I said, your applications are coming up online. They're moving into different environments. You quickly want to limit your user access to those applications or those environments. Let's say you have an application in QA environment, and now it's gone to production environment. You don't want your QA users to access it anymore. From Illumio side, it's as simple as we just update the label on that workload, and we pass that information to Netskope. And Netskope can then use the predefined policies to allow or deny users from accessing that workload.
Oh, I see. So once it goes from QA to production, you no longer want the QA person in there messing around with it. So we would change the policy based off of that, and then block them from getting to that workload.
Yes, okay. Yes. I mean, like I said, it's in fast-paced environment, you have new applications coming up everyone. You have your users firing up AWS workloads all the time. You have new users firing up your workloads in your on-prem environment, in your data centers. So you would want a way to limit access, or for users to either access those workloads or access those applications. So I think this solution ties in beautifully with each other.
I guess it goes backward too, or the other way also, where you wouldn't want production users getting to a QA workload. So you would be blocking the typical user from getting to that workload while it's in the QA label state, and then vice versa once it comes out goes into production. Okay.
Yeah, there could be so many applications based on the individual organization requirements. This solution just makes your zero trust network architecture very compliant and easy to manage, I would say, because it's tied dynamically. You don't have so many pieces that you need to update. Once you have your policies defined, your users defined, even if your new users come online or new workloads come online, they automatically receive the default zero trust access that they're supposed to.
Yeah, the dynamic aspect of this, I think, is really cool.
Yeah.
So I think the audience, what they really want to see is us walking through the demo so that they really have an idea of what's going on here.
Yeah, we have a great demo in place, and let me walk you through it.
All right, let's show you that.
I'm going to demonstrate the Netskope and Illumio integration. While using Netskope One and Illumio, you can tightly control your workloads. Their website says that Illumio's Zero Trust Segmentation is used for breach containment. They visualize all communication between workloads and devices, set granular segmentation policies to control communications, and isolate high-value assets to stop breaches and ransomware from spreading. They're a leader in microsegmentation. Okay, they can do all that without Netskope. So where does Netskope come in? When you add Netskope's VPN replacement product, ZTNA Next, to the mix, Netskope can provide user group restrictions to the Illumio workloads. For example, Netskope One can apply policy around all QA and production workloads and only allow users in the company's intra group called QA to the QA workloads. Once the Illumio label on the workload changes to production, the users in the QA group lose their access to that workload. Let's see this in action. When I log into Illumio, you'll see that I have this workload. I've given it a couple of different labels. I've given it the QA and the Cloud Exchange label. With the integration, Cloud Exchange will be retrieving these labels and then sending them up to Netskope to apply policy. Here in Cloud Exchange, this integration is in the Threat Exchange module. When I go into the threat IOCs, you'll see that I have that same workload that I was showing within Illumio's product. When I dive into it, you'll see that the labels that are being added from Illumio have come in as role QA and Cloud Exchange. I set up a business rule that matches all of my Illumio workloads. And then I've also created a sharing rule to share this information with Netskope. So what you'll see is that it's going to create a new private app called Illumio 2. I'm going to allow TCP protocols 443 and 22. Then I'm going to tie this to the ZTNA publisher that's sitting in front of my workloads. Within Netskope, Cloud Exchange is creating this private application here, adding all of the Illumio workloads to it, and then also bringing in all of the labels that are associated with those workloads. I can filter these and then also apply policy based off of the labels that are coming in from the integration. A sample policy would look something like this. I'm going to allow access to those workloads if your role is QA. I've also added one more level to this. I'm saying that I'm only going to allow users to this workload if their user group in intra is quality assurance. Then I'm also looking for that label of role for QA so that I know that these are the workloads that people in QA should be able to get to. On the block policy, it's very similar. I'm still looking at that same user group. They're coming in via a client, but now I'm saying that if it's a production workload, then I'm going to block their access to it, and then I'm going to give them a notification of why they can't get to that workload any longer. And I'll show you in that demonstration on the Netskope client. On my client, you'll see that I have my Netskope client here running. and that my configuration is set up to quality assurance, just like I was showing you within my user group information. So if I try and go to this workload, I have this by IP, but of course you would be able to go to it via URL also. And you'll see that I do have access to this workload. So I'm able to get to the workload because it's labeled as QA and my user's in the QA group. But now if I go in and I change it to production, I should be blocked. So back on the Illumio interface, let's go in and make that change. I should also point out that in my plugin configuration, I have a sync interval. So in order for this change to take effect, I have to wait for my sync interval. This can be changed down to a smaller number, down to a minute if you would like, in order for it to be polling more frequently. As you see, I'm no longer able to get to this production, to the production workload, and a pop-up comes up that I've customized. I created this so it can say anything that you want. And it could be different on each policy that you have. So you can make them very specific for the policy that you are using. This one basically is saying, hey, you're not able to get there because you're a QA user and you're trying to get to a production workload. Just to recap, my user device is here. We have a Netskope client on this device. It's sending traffic through Netskope One's Trust Engine that is then being connected to a ZTNA Next publisher, which is giving me access to the workloads in my data center, whether it's public or private data center. For example, the one that I'm using here is within AWS. And so Illumio then has all of these different labels on their systems, on their workloads. And what we're doing is we're sharing that information with Cloud Exchange that is then using that to enforce policy based off of user group that the user is in order to get very granular about who has access to these workloads. One thing that comes to mind for me is that if I have a workload that gets quarantined because of something is a threat found there within an Illumio, you would still want certain people to be able to get to that workload so that they could fix it. This would enable that type of workflow also.
As you see, this is such a simple and yet so powerful demo. Once you have all these integration pieces in place, all I need to do is update the label that metadata is consumed by Netskope, and the policies get updated dynamically. Microsegmentation is really picking up because currently Gartner estimates there are only 6% organizations who have microsegmentation as part of their Zero Trust strategy.
Wow.
And this number will grow up all the way up till 65% by 2026, as estimated by Gartner. So the hard part about implementing Zero Trust strategy is it has so many pieces. It's not just the user, its workloads, it's your identity, it's your access. So it's generally a very complex task. And Gartner estimates, I mean, since a lot of government and federal requirements are now to have your Zero Trust network architecture in place to be compliant to work with government. And like I said, I mean, it's a complex task. It has so many pieces, but with these kind of integration, it makes it simpler for any organization to implement Zero Trust.
Yeah. Well, with Netskope being the leader in the SSE quadrant for the last 3 years, I can see that this is really going to pay off for our customers. Be sure to check out our documentation. We have a couple of blogs posted. We have some documentation on our website about the integration, and reach out to us if you need any help with integrating it.
Okay, great stuff in that conversation and a really informative demo there. I just want to thank Gary and Heather for all their insights. Just a quick reminder now that this is your last chance to grab any of those resources in the handout section. Excuse me. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Jalm Greenberg from Idaho. So congratulations to Jalm. We'll be in touch to get you your card. Well, I hope that you found this conversation about zero trust as informative as I have. Sadly, it's come to an end, but we will be emailing you in the next day or so with a link so you can rewatch it or share it with any of your colleagues. And now, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Illumio and Netskope for making this event possible. And thanks, as always, for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.